right, good afternoon. I'm Diana Waring, Director of the Department of the Interior Museum, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our latest installment of our Lunchtime Lecture Series. And as many of you know, these presentations tend to encompass a wide range of topics that reflect the diverse workings of our bureaus in the Department of the Interior, past and present. Today's program is a discussion on BOEM's emerging technology and the future of BOEM ocean science. Before we get started, I do want to point out that on your seats you have a feedback form, and we encourage you to fill them out and deposit them in the tray outside. A lot of our lecture ideas do come from our employees and members of the public just wanting to learn more or wanting to highlight something that you're working on or your colleagues are working on in your offices. In terms of programs coming up, on Wednesday, October 2nd, Marnie Pepper of the U.S. Department of Agriculture Chesapeake Bay Nutria Eradication Project will present, hopefully joined by a canine, to discuss the use of trained canines in invasive species eradication that's been done in public lands, including National Park Service and other Department of the Interior lands. On Thursday, November 21st, Sam Droege, head of the U.S. Geological Survey Native Bee Lab, will give an introduction on our over 400 local bee species. So not honeybees, but our other native bees that are also worth saving. So I do want to introduce Dr. Rodney Cluck. He is currently the chief of the Division of Environmental Sciences at the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. He leads the Environmental Studies program, and that is the backbone, the scientific backbone that informs policy decisions regarding leasing and development of ocean energy and non-energy marine minerals resources. He holds a PhD in environmental sociology from Mississippi State University and a master's degree in rural sociology from the University of Arkansas, Fayetteville. Please give me a hand in welcoming Dr. Rodney Cluck.
Great, thank you, Dan, and thanks everybody for coming. I really appreciate this opportunity to speak with you today regarding emerging technology and the future of BOEM ocean science. For those of you that aren't familiar, just let me tell you that BOEM's mission is to manage ocean energy and mineral resources on the Outer Continental Shelf in a safe and environmentally sound manner. As Diana said, I'm in the environmental program. So what we do with regard to development in the ocean, whether that's oil and gas development or marine minerals or renewable energy, is make sure that environmental protection informed by science is a foremost concern and an indispensable consideration. We have to have this science and information in order to make good decisions. Now, the Environmental Studies program, which I'm in charge of, is the scientific backbone that informs BOEM decision making. Our science is use-inspired in that sense, in the sense that it's applied science. We use the results to inform the management decisions, as I said. We always adhere to the utmost levels of scientific integrity and credibility. We seek partnerships and leverage funds where possible. A lot of the studies I'm going to be talking about today and the work that we're doing is with partners. We engage with stakeholders regularly and the public, and always ensure that we're doing outreach and providing our information to the public with regard to our decision making. Now, the first thing I'm going to talk about is air quality analysis. We entered into an agreement with Goddard Space Flight Center to do work on air quality, and there's a couple of objectives here. What we were thinking was that we could use satellites and satellite data to actually measure offshore emissions in the Gulf of Mexico from the oil and gas platforms. I sit on the Subcommittee of Ocean Science and Technology, and a colleague there, Dr. Jack Kay from NASA, and I were talking one day over coffee, and he started telling me about spectral analysis from space. And I said, wow, can you tell pollutants from there, and he said, I don't know. Have your scientists come over and talk to our scientists. So we did. What you see here is we're monitoring NO2 from satellites from space. As you can see over New Orleans, humans actually tend to pollute more than whatever's in the ocean, even if it is an oil and gas platform. So around the city, it's very concentrated around New Orleans. But we were able to find 2 plumes out there, and in red marks where there's higher concentrations of NO2. So we were able to distinguish this, from satellites, NASA satellites from space. So the next step was to say, okay, let's, can we ground truth it? Can we verify it? Can we ensure that it was, valid? So we went out to try to understand if what we were seeing was valid, and if the satellites were giving us accurate data. So again, talking oil and gas platforms using satellites, but also ground truthing to the ships. This project was it's called SCOPE. It's a Satellite Coastal and Oceanic Atmospheric Pollution Experiment. The good news is it worked. Using this type of technology is revolutionary, because if we can look at pollution from space over the ocean, we don't have to send as many ships or helicopters and inspectors to go out and inspect. We can target areas where higher levels of concentrations are in pollution that we can observe from space are happening, and then we can again target those companies. So again, using spectral analysis, essentially light from these satellites from space, has really told us a lot of information. So what we did with the SCOPE project, we again took the ships and then the information that we had from the satellites, and we visited several platforms. Some big ones like Thunder Horse out there, Mars, Olympus is another one that we visited. We also visited Petronas, and again we were able to ground truth these things. So it's very exciting, because again, an idea one has talking over coffee just worked. So I think, for air quality analysis, this is the future of BOEM ocean science. This was not done over coffee, but this is another really kind of cutting edge technique that we're using now, cube satellites. Traditionally, if you have an animal tagged and swimming in the water out in the ocean, your tag sends up signals. Look on this slide. We have just a handful of Argos satellites that were sent up in the 70s that actually get the signals from these tags, and then they send it to a receiver station, and they send it over to the data center. So again, the animal has to be in a certain place, and the satellites have to be in a certain place for everything to work. So what we're really experimenting with now is cube satellites, which are a little bit bigger than a coffee cup, but you can shoot them up and they can fly around in swarms. So you can have the information going up to one cube satellite that will talk to another, and another. It will also talk to the Argos satellite. All that information can feed directly into the receiver center, and then into the data center. With all these this swarm of cubes that you can have up there, you can have different types of sensors that are up there, not just the sensors for the big Argos satellite that you got to send up, but you can keep sending up these cube satellites with different types of sensors that will allow you to have different types of information as information needs change. So when we're doing work like this, at least with this one, sometimes it's good to introduce crowdsourcing. So that's like just to go out and say, hello world, what other ideas do you have out here that could maybe help us in trying to make sure that we're using the best technology, that we're using the best sensors to understand this phenomenon. So we did this challenge with NASA. The prize was $30,000. we got more than 400 individuals from 38 countries. So we got ideas about cube satellites and sensors from everywhere from South Africa to Pakistan to all over the place. So out of these, all these 400 individuals, there were 2 winners. One that was in London and another one in Stanford. Actually, there's 5 grad students in Stanford that come up with some ideas that we were able to use and actually really implement those. So when we're using these type of satellites, we're able to track the animal much better. We're able to look at flipper stroke. All these little red arrows coming up and down are flipper strokes. When the animal turns, it can turn in 40 degrees. These are the yellow areas there. So it allows us to get a whole lot more information with regard to the animal's movements, depth, and everything like this. And again, we're trying to really get even better and better on tracking this, from these cube satellites. And with more and more sensors being able to be deployed, it provides just a whole host of information. It's a game changer. It totally is a game changer. But, with this game-changing type of information coming in, there's a lot of data. So we really have to think about computer learning or computer vision and artificial intelligence. We can use information, for example, from flukes and imagery from these satellites to look at the yellow pigments here. The pigments here are in yellow, to actually be able to tell not only species but an individual of the whale. So we can tell an individual there that's going on from the data that we're getting. But again, there tends to be more and more data that one accumulates, and if you really start getting lots and lots of data with the different types of pigments and individuals, it becomes quite overwhelming. So what we really have to do is, and what we're working on, is trying to manage as best we can all this data through artificial intelligence. We're not only doing this with whales, but we're doing this with birds as well, where you can take an image and computer can tell you what species of bird, if that bird's an endangered species or whatever. But again, the computer must learn. So you have to get all the data and then to kind of teach the computer how to do this. But this would, a lot of the data we have so much of now, it would take an individual a decade to go through it if they could even stand doing it. So we used to make graduate students do all that work, but I think this is even becoming unreasonable now because there's so much. So another area that's really cutting edge that we're working on is acoustics. And this is really listening and understanding in real time about animals that are out there and listening to the sounds. We're recording the sounds in the ocean from an acoustic recorder. The data is sent via satellite. The data is then cleaned up by a computer, not a human. The computer then would identify the sounds, and then finally the human's involved. It goes to the human, and the analyst will verify these sounds. And then a really interesting aspect to what we're doing here is we're sending this information out via text, email, website on whalealert.org. So this information is available to anyone. Anyone also can go on here, a fisherman can go on here if they've spotted a right whale in the Atlantic, and can also indicate latitude, longitude. So this data is open source and just accumulates. And more people and anybody can have access to it, which really, there are challenges with lots of data, but it also tells us so we can learn so much with different information. So while we're listening to the animals, and I think for many years we focused just on listening to the animals. which is important. But it's also really important to hear what else is going on out there. Ship traffic, boats, earthquakes, any kind of natural sources. We know that the ocean is an extremely noisy place, and we want to make sure that we're really understanding the acoustics, so understanding what can we really learn from this. So we've started a project in partnership with NOAA, among others, and this is it's called ADION, the Atlantic Deepwater Ecosystem Observatory Network. So what you see on the right here are just a whole host of recorders that we've deployed in the Atlantic Ocean to capture the entire soundscape that's out there. And so we've deployed these, and we're listening. And we do hear lots of different things. We hear animals, but we also hear ships and different types of things. But I thought that you might be most interested in listening to the animals. So first we'll listen to a dolphin. Our bioacoustician, when I talk to her about these things, she always says, think about these as musical notes. Think about these that are coming across as whether it sounds to you like a song or an instrument or something like that. Hence the little musical note up in the right hand corner. The humpback. You can see when it turns white that the noises, the calls are coming. So again, we're picking up all of these from these recorders that we went out there to do with our ADION study. Minkies are kind of fun. The big right whale. And my personal favorite, just because I think they sound like they're having just such a good time, the pilot whales. Sounds like a party I'd like to join. So, acoustics, understanding that, it's very important. Also understanding what's really down in the deep ocean is also extremely important as well. So, what we've done here is a study called Deep Search. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about the human-occupied vehicle here called the Alvin. We also use remotely operated vehicles as well, so some are just more just robots that go down. But this particular human-operated vehicle can carry a pilot and a couple of scientists, go down to around 4,500 meters, collect different types of samples and video and photographs. It has 2 robot arms that they can take different samples, and the average dive time is about 7 hours. So you're down there for a while if you want to go down and do this. Here's a video from the Alvin. They really don't move that fast. We speeded it up. This is a discovery we made, which was actually in the newspaper. It is in the Atlantic. We discovered 85 linear miles of Lophelia coral. Most of this coral we found in deep water in the Gulf of Mexico. We had thought that it was here in the Atlantic, but we didn't realize it was so abundant. So they're down, first of all, when the discovery happens and you discover something like this, it's very, very exciting. And then, of course, you have to go down and take samples and photographs and everything else. With the Alvin on board and the pilot and the scientists that went down, again, you can take the photographs, you can get the samples, put them in the Alvin, everything, and take all this information back up. It's actually there's a much longer video on our BOEM website if you'd like to see it, BOEM/studies. So next, eDNA. So environmental DNA. This is another kind of cutting edge type of technique that we're using. So what is environmental DNA? All living things have DNA. All living things shed DNA. eDNA is simply DNA that's released from an organism, like me or you, or a fish, into the environment, hence eDNA. Where does it come from? It can come from our hair, our scales. It can come from poop. It can come from any kind of place like that. Reproductive cells, anything that comes from the environment, we can look at it and analyze it. There's a couple of different methods to this, and historically, we've looked at kind of the single species method, which you can identify one species. In other words, you get a sample from a water column, and you can say, an Atlantic sturgeon, that type of fish was there. But what we're really interested in is identifying multiple species, and this is called metabarcoding. And the idea behind this is you take a sample of water, and you can analyze kind of this broad range of primers to understand everything that's there, everything that was in that water column. So it could be fish, it could be plants, it could be anything that's there, and you can really understand kind of the ecosystem of that using environmental DNA. So it's quite amazing. One challenge is that you have to have an index to that whatever you find. It has to be indexed in a library. So, for example, we're working with the Smithsonian Institute, the Natural History Museum. We have been for nearly 50 years now. We've got a very large invertebrate collection there. We've discovered over 400 new species. But what we're really working on now is making sure that all the DNA is properly barcoded in their library. So what we can do is when we get eDNA samples, we can match the read to that genetic reference library. So we're able to understand it. Again, if it's not in the library, you don't know what it is. So it's very, very important to actually build this up. So again, if you're just taking water samples, it can cost much less. So cost and speed of the methods are definitely an advantage here. There are, if you're dealing with the DNA, there, you do have accuracy. You do have repeatability. It's non-invasive sampling, so you don't have to collect, an entire fish. You can just take the water, whatever's in the water. So that type of sampling is non-invasive. So that's important. And also this, it's also multi-trophic. You can take water samples from different levels up and down the water column, and you can look at the different trophic networks up and down and see how they may work together. So it's not only multi-species, it's multi-trophic approach. Really work together well. But it's important to have a reality check. When I first started reading about this, I thought, oh my goodness, this is going to solve all my problems, all of our challenges. Well, no. However, it can. The eDNA can provide information on species presence. Can help target field sampling programs, reduce sampling effort, again to save money, and it's non-invasive, like I'd mentioned. But it cannot confirm absolute absence. It cannot confirm, for example, that a right whale was never there. The right whale could have swam through the day before, and you just didn't get the eDNA from it. It can't determine abundance, how many species were there. Life stage or condition, it can't determine those. And again, without the sequence library, you get nothing. You get no reads. So it's very important, again, to have that library. But overall, I do think that there are some really important applications for eDNA. Actually, for many years within the environmental studies program in BOEM, one really big challenge that we've had is monitoring. We're supposed to monitor the ecosystem to look if there's any kind of change or impacts from the activities that we oversee. Again, oil and gas, marine minerals, and renewable energy. But monitoring is very expensive. We've monitored the flower garden banks in the Gulf of Mexico for nearly 50 years now. That takes ships and divers and other things like that to go out and monitor. We've monitored the intertidal areas throughout California and the Pacific coast for about 40 years now. Again, that takes people to go out and do the sampling and the analysis. We've monitored the bowhead whale migration up in the Arctic. That takes aircraft and brave individuals to go out and actually spot the whales. So monitoring can have challenges. So I'm really thinking that eDNA applications will help us get a little closer to doing a better job monitoring, not only with the anthropogenic activities such as fishing, aquaculture, extraction of energy or shipping, but also just changes in the ecosystem, changes in just the conditions of the climate and other things. So I think that what we're doing here, and I think again eDNA does offer quite a bit. If we're looking at certain things like tracking animals, like I showed you earlier, tracking animals with satellites or with acoustics along with eDNA makes a lot of sense. Passive acoustic monitoring, where we're basically just listening for the animals out there, it makes a lot of sense to also use eDNA. Active acoustics as well, if we're out there and our friends from USGS are doing mapping out there. It also is important to maybe take some eDNA samples, like these little red spots under the active acoustic here with those are probably fish. So you're probably going to get samples of fish and the different type of species. But what I really think is most important with regard to just protecting the oceans and protecting the earth is to think about all these things together. If you think about the technologies that we have, as a nation, as scientists, and using those technologies to the fullest of their ability, BOEM's a very small agency, so we don't have satellites like NASA, but we have friends in NASA, and they have satellites. So when we talk about what are some of our challenges with air quality with our friends from NASA, they say, oh, hey, let's try to solve that problem. If we're looking at if we're looking at acoustics and wanting to understand that more, and we don't have any big ships, but NOAA does. So we reach out to NOAA, and we work with them on the ADION study that I mentioned in the Atlantic and in acoustics and listening. We're also working with NOAA and USGS on the eDNA as well. So I think really what we're talking about when we're talking about the future of ocean science and BOEM and these emerging technologies is a combination of all these things that I've talked about, because that's where you get the robust analysis. eDNA is great, but it's not a silver bullet. Acoustics tells you a lot, but that's not the only thing that's not the only information you need to make good decisions out there. Satellite imagery and the CUBE satellites, really cool stuff, and we're going to continue to use them. But again, from space, you're not going to get the whole picture. But together, I think we do. And in order for DOI to meet our stewardship responsibility, in order for BOEM to do the job that we're supposed to in our Outer Continental Shelf, using these innovative technologies for the safe and sustainable development of America's ocean energy and marine minerals, is really critical. Because without science to inform our decisions, we're just guessing. And there's such a big ocean out there, and there's so many things to learn that, as we continue to use these emerging technologies, and we work not only with other federal agencies but also the private sector, we manage better and better. Just a closing quote, one that I like to use, Louis Pasteur from 1863. We are a science program in Interior. We are a science program in a regulatory agency. And when I said at the first of this talk that our science is use-inspired, I usually say use-inspired other than applied, because all of our science we use for decision-making. But this quote to me really kind of is the essence of what we do. There's not pure science and applied science, but only science and the application of science. I say this to my academic friends and the National Science Foundation often, and that's okay because they get it. But really, it's the science that do inform our decisions, and this is what's so important for us to ensure that development activity on the Outer Continental Shelf, whether that's oil and gas, renewable energy, or marine minerals, is sustainable. Thank you.